This entire video is meant to be fair use. I'm commenting and reacting based upon another creator's content. Please don't give me a copyright strike or pull this video down. And I'd in fact love to make more content like this in the future. So if you guys enjoyed this video, smash the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new to my channel, and let's dive back into Landlords Are Bad Everybody from Thought Slime. What is up, YouTube? Matt McKeever here, and today's video is going to be a little bit different. So in today's video, we're going to be shooting a reaction video of myself reacting to, I'm not even sure really what I'm reacting to, so I haven't watched this video yet. A friend of mine, Kayla, sent it along to me. You guys probably know Kayla. She runs Ontario Landlords Watch. She's a landlord's rights advocate, and she's really done a lot for us in Ontario as landlords. So she mentioned to me that she had call out in another YouTuber's video about around the 11-minute mark. She sent me the video. You know, she didn't really give me a lot of context on this, so I'm kind of interested to just watch it fresh with you guys. Now, the title of the video is Landlords Are Bad Everyone. So I'm not going to lie, I'm going to guess I'm going to have a bias against this video. I have a little sneaking suspicion there. This is from another YouTuber, Thought Slime. I don't know Thought Slime well, so again, this is going to be my first time exposed to his content. I'm actually really excited to dive into this and just see what arguments they make to state why landlords are bad. It's a pretty universal statement. So anyways, let's dive into it. Oh, I'm going to suspect that I'm going to get a bunch of new people on my YouTube channel because of this video. Feel free to jump in the comment section and just spew hate, because that's what you're going to do anyways. Actually, just recently, we lost our recent army of haters, so it feels kind of appropriate anyways. There was like a small group that were just constantly hating on the channel, and they disappeared. So I guess this is perfect timing. Maybe we'll build a new army of haters based upon this. So jump in that comment section, spew your hate. YouTube algorithm still counts it as engagement. And let's do this. So I'm recording my screen, guys. Let's pull up this video, and we're going to see my reactions to Landlords Are Bad Everyone from Thought Slime.
Ladies, it's me, Slimebeard. Today, I'd like to talk about landlords and why they're a problem. These guys, am I right? First of all, they come on board, you think they're going to be good crewmates, they don't know how to tie up the jib, and when it's time to swab the poop deck, where are they? Psst. Furthermore, I'm the one that's got scurvy. Why have to carry around these big heavy treasure chests? What? What, Jeremy? What is so important that you had to ruin my
he's rocking a green screen too.
Landlubbers. No, it's a video about landlords, actually. Okay, what do you think a landlord is, Mr. Slime? Hello, I'm Thopslop. Today we're talking about landlords. Landlords are bad. Socialists have always been against rent-seeking. Now let me get 3 things out of the way right out the jump, because I can hear you tippity-tap typing up all your little comments. Number 1, I don't think all landlords are bad people. Like I said about cops, it does not matter to me if an individual landlord is a good person who will go to heaven. The institution that they take part in by being a landlord is what I take issue with specifically. I'm not making a judgment on anyone's entire moral character. I'm making a judgment on this particular action that they're taking. And it's not because I'm just bitter about some bad landlord experience I've had in the past. I mean, I've certainly had my fair share, like I'm sure all of you have. But my current landlords kind of own. Like, they charge me well below market price, like a quarter of market price. And they're friendly and helpful and all around pleasant and decent people who have real jobs in addition to renting to me.
Whoa, what's going on, Thought Slime? Just thought I'd interject here a little bit. I'm actually Matt McKeever's VP of Media, and I also have my own YouTube channel, The Hungarian Experiment. That's actually how I met Matt. And do you think you're special? Do you think that you're the only one who has a just and great landlords? You know, Matt McKeever here, you're probably already judging him if you're watching this video, as well as maybe all the followers that you're sending over to this video. But I have to say, Matt is a great person, a great landlord. And one thing that he actually did when we were creating passion projects together for about a year or so before I even started working with him is we started this unique thing called the Social Lab, where we took one of his sixplexes in London, Ontario, and what we did is we offered half-price rent to any creatives, any YouTubers, any people who wanted to go all in on social media and YouTube and creativity. Again, we offered half-price rent for people to come live in this place where they would create content together. If you're interested, it was a bit of a failure on our part, especially my part, but in general, like, we started a whole YouTube channel featured around this house, and we gave these people the opportunity to get exposure, to get attention through our channel, and as well have half-price rent if they are willing and dedicated to live in this place. Now, what actually happened is we didn't fill out the whole place with people, but we got 2 people that lived there, and they paid nothing. We gave them free rent for 6 months. Now, what we found out long term is that when you give people things for free, they don't tend to work for things. So that's why it turned out to be a bit of a fail. But Matt here, he's a badass guy. He's a badass because I believe, he's living truthfully and morally and openly and honestly here in the world. And that's a big part of my journey as well too. But Matt, you're probably judging him already because, oh, he has 100 tenants because he doesn't have another job. Well, he's going all in into helping other people, helping people like myself. I was a server for a long time. Then I was working as a nighttime auditor at a prestigious hotel here in London. And he gave me the opportunity through his vehicle of real estate investing to work with him full time. And now I'm going all in on my passions as well as helping him with his YouTube channel. And now we're building up a whole big media team. We're giving people jobs here in London, Ontario, even during quarantine. So you got to stop looking at things out of your own perspective there, man. You think I must be so special, like my landlords are the only unjust landlords out there in the world, and all the other landlords are just trying to take from people. These guys work really hard. Matt put in many years to get himself to this point in life where he can now help people. And now he's creating a network all across Ontario of badass real estate investors and landlords, and we're featuring them on his YouTube channel. And these men and these women are doing more than just trying to greedily take from people. They're improving the neighborhoods. They're helping in so many other ways. What I do every year is I participate in the 519 pledge here in London, where we collect socks and we donate them to combat homelessness here in London, Ontario. The biggest people who donate to this because they feel like they have an obligation to because of their situation in life are all the real estate investors that I've met networking and met from Matt McKeever's journey here. So you think your landlords are the only friendly, decent people out there in the world who have other jobs as well? No, there's lots of them, especially here in Ontario, and they're really good people. Let's get back to Matt McKeever reacting to your ridiculous video thoughts, Lime.
My current landlords kind of own, like they charge me well below market price, like a quarter of market price, and they're friendly and helpful and all around pleasant and decent people who have real jobs in addition to renting to me. That doesn't change the fact that the institution of rent seeking is fundamentally immoral and just as exploitative as siphoning the surplus value of a worker's labor. Number 2, often people will say that rent seeking is justified because the landlord does their part by paying for the mortgage and paying for repairs, which is not true. Tenants pay for both of those things.
All right, so one, this is actually going to be a more nuanced argument than I was expecting. I'll be honest, guys. I assumed that this was going to be some rent striker frothing at the mouth. He actually seems very nuanced and specific in his arguments. At the same time, I think I know what direction this is going, and we are going to find ourselves at loggerheads or at odds in regards to our perspective, but actually enjoying it so far.
Things because the money that the landlord uses to pay for those things was collected from their tenants. The landlord is not paying for jack. They're spending their tenants' money. Furthermore, that money that they spent to pay off their mortgage generates equity for them.
So here, I'm going to take issue with this argument that landlords don't pay for anything and that their tenants pay for everything. If we view this outside of the landlord-tenant model and simply look at it as business and customers, all businesses use their customers' money. Like, that's how a business works, guys, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're running a coffee shop, an apartment building, or a Fortune 500 company. You get revenue from your customers and you spend that on your expenses and invest that into assets, and then you keep the surplus as profits. I mean, that's the most fundamental thing here, but at the same time, still enjoying this video.
And diddly squat for the tenant. If I took $1,000 from you and used $400 of it to buy you a Nintendo Switch, am I doing you a favor? Is it okay for me to do that because I bought you a Nintendo Switch? And number 3, for the...
So this comment about the Nintendo Switch is interesting, but again, it's the exact same argument that we could make about any business. You guys understand that when Nike sells you a pair of sneakers, those sneakers cost them a lot less money. And so that they actually profit off of that transaction, right? You guys know that? Same with your local coffee shop or your vegan donut shop. They still profit. Like, that's the whole endeavor. That's the whole point of capitalism, really, for us, is that people can invest. They can benefit from the proceeds of their labor. That's like the whole point.
Brain geniuses in the comments telling me, just buy a home if I don't like it. Gee, wish I'd thought of that. Let me just check on computer. Yup, looks like the whole housing market has become completely turbo-fucked because it's more profitable for global investment firms to charge us all rent than sell us a permanent home, you ding-dongs.
So this is an interesting argument that he's making here in regards to, if you don't like it, just go buy, and he's arguing you can't buy. What's interesting is, if you look at like the Case-Shiller's index, it actually argues that real estate really just keeps pace with inflation. And this is an argument that a lot of paper investors, so stock investors, use against me in real estate investing, is that real estate doesn't actually appreciate over time. It simply is an inflation hedge. Now, in a relatively efficient market, that would be true, barring other macro influences or micro influences on that specific piece of land. However, when we're looking at it like over the broad, it kind of mainly keeps up with inflation. So I think your bigger argument here, Thought Slime, is really hating on government inflationary policies, which are eroding the value of a dollar. And this is becoming even more apparent and true during COVID-19, when we see governments injecting stimulus on a scale that has literally never been seen before in the history of humanity. $1 trillion coins, people. $1 trillion coins.
Now, for posterity, I want to mention that I'm recording this video in the middle of the 2020 quarantine because of COVID-19, and there's a lot of talk going around about a rent strike or the state mandating a rent moratorium. I'm not going to hold my breath for the latter. So
I'm going to stop right here, Thought Slime, because I love the condescending tone you're using, but what I'm going to throw back is, what's your counter argument? Like, what's your solution? Maybe you're going to get into a solution here. I'm fascinated because if it involves something like rent control, well, you should probably go and watch my 30-minute video I think I did a couple years ago on rent control. And just so that we're all clear, rent control is one of the best studied and understood economic scenarios, and in fact is used in a lot of textbooks to really show the unintended consequences that government regulation and interference can have when they start setting price controls or when they start regulating a market. In fact, like, there's studies, CBC, which is, in my argument, very left-leaning in general when it comes to their narrative on, the news they report. They've referenced multiple times in different articles a study back in the 1980s, 1988, where 95% of Canadian economists agreed that rent control doesn't serve a purpose, that it's actually counterproductive towards the goal of trying to create affordability. New York Times, again, I wouldn't argue that this is a right-leaning publication. In fact, I think it's kind of left of center. But anyways, the New York Times, they've also released multiple stories showing that, different studies, and in 1993, for example, again, 93% of economists agreed that rent control doesn't work and it's actually a detriment to trying to help affordability. And I'm not going to get deep into that right now because I want to see if Thought Slime is going to touch upon rent control, because this is usually what they touch upon at some point in time, is rent control.
Discussion certainly inspired me to talk about this subject because it turns out that a lot of my fellow leftists have some wild ideas on the subject. It is not simply during times of crisis where this institution becomes immoral. These times of crisis bring it into sharper relief, but it's always immoral to practice rent-seeking.
I appreciate at least the consistency in his moral stance. So it's not like he's just reacting, at least based upon this video. It doesn't sound like he's initially reacting just from an emotional standpoint because of quarantine or COVID-19. So I do want to give a tip of the hat there for being consistent in your worldviews.
People need a place to live all of the time. It is a physiological need. It is at the bottom of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There should not ever be homeless people, particularly when there are more homes than people.
So this argument that there should never be homeless people, I can empathize with the sentiment and I can appreciate the perspective people have. But what we need to understand is if you're going to say that something can never be, it means that you need to enforce it now. So are you going to violently enforce that no one ever goes homeless? And once we start taking it to the extremes, which I think is a natural conclusion based upon kind of the tonality he's using here, you know, that also doesn't look good in my opinion. But we'll see where this goes.
The idea that we should pay to be housed, or to have any of our basic human needs met without which we will almost certainly die, is unfathomably cruel. There is absolutely no moral justification for this, and the only reason that we as a society tolerate it is because the people who own most of the homes also tend to make the laws and dictate the boundaries of acceptable public discourse. Every person who dies of exposure...
So there's real danger here, and I know what direction he's going to go in. There's real danger here when we start taking these really polarizing stances. When you're taking these extreme stances, the natural conclusion is that someone, somebody, some politic now has to dictate who goes where, who does what, and who has the rights to whose labors. If I as an individual can't enter in willingly to contracts, if I can't willingly benefit from the proceeds of my labor, we're setting up an economic system that's not going to have many incentives. And it's going to be very difficult for anything to get accomplished if there's no incentives. But maybe he solves this.
On the street has been murdered by an economic system that prioritizes someone's right to make a meager profit on Airbnb over the lives of its most vulnerable people. Every hotel with an empty room has killed that person for the price of about $137 a night. That's all a human life is worth. If you're against homelessness, and since you're presumably not some sort of evil...
Like, this is interesting. I can see he's going to put us either on a hard line against homelessness or we're evil capitalist pigs. There is a middle ground. Like, people have to have individual agency and they need to be responsible for it. And in fact, a lot of the homeless problems that we have today don't really stem, honestly, from an affordability crisis. I think anyone that's trying to be intellectually honest with themselves understands this. Because what's happened is we've had a degradation in some of our social services. So when we started just letting people out of mental hospitals, once we stopped really dealing with mental health issues, that's what's creating the homelessness problem. It's not affordability. You could literally drop the price of an apartment to $1, and that's not going to inherently create zero homelessness. There's a lot more to these complex issues than just one silver bullet answer. And so I truly believe, and I believe that all the data backs me up on this, that there's no sweeping generalization policy change that we can institute. And again, there's so many unintended consequences when we see government step in and start regulating anything. I don't disagree that on Maslow's hierarchy of needs that shelter is a physiological need, and it's one of our base needs along with water and food. At the same time, once we start talking about shelter, there's a huge variety and quality of shelter. And so I don't see anyone ever arguing that, you know, someone that's starving to death has the right to caviar or they have the right to steak. They argue that they have the right to food. They have the right to maybe 2,000 calories a day, that sort of concept. And when we start looking at trying to give free rent or make renting illegal in general, if we start to try and outlaw landlording, one of the natural conclusions is, well, does a person have a right to live anywhere they want, or do they just have a right to shelter? Because right now, you could easily move to other markets. Like, we have the ability to be mobile individuals. Just because you want to live in downtown Toronto doesn't inherently mean that you should have the right to live in downtown Toronto. If it's highly desirable, I think that it seems natural that people should have to compete in order to earn that spot. The way it works in a capitalist system is you compete with your dollars. Your dollars are how you vote. And as well, where you decide to spend your money shows your personal priorities. So if living in downtown Toronto is extremely important to you as an individual, then you need to start developing the skills that are going to allow you to earn the income in order to be able to afford that apartment. if living in downtown Toronto isn't that important to you, then you're probably better served to go look for alternative accommodations in lower cost markets. This is the one thing that blows my mind when I see millennials struggling to try and buy a home in Toronto. I'm like, why don't you just come down to London, Ontario and hang out with me? Like 3 or 4 years ago, you could literally get in for $200,000. These days, maybe it's going to be closer to $300,000 for that single family home. But buy it house hack, which means become a landlord, and start getting some of your tenants to help subsidize your cost of living. One of the fastest ways to financial independence, retiring early, the FIRE movement that we talk about here all the time on my YouTube channel. So again, I think it's just really important that when we're looking at potentially wanting to help people, that we don't let our emotions hijack our entire thought process.
Evil hobgoblin, you should be. Then you are against the institution of rent seeking. You are against landlords.
So I'm not against landlords, nor am I against rent seeking.
Homelessness could not exist without landlords. Homelessness could not exist if we...
Homelessness could not exist without landlords? Completely disagree. Like, pre-capitalism, are you arguing that everyone had their own shelter, their own lodge, their own cave, their own teepee, their own whatever? No, I don't think that you're like... People have always struggled. That's just part of the human condition. And I think it's admirable that as a society, as we've evolved, that we've tried to lessen the burden that especially those that are less fortunate or less capable are of having to struggle against the human condition. But to completely remove it is naive, and to think that one policy change would completely remove it is beyond naive, in my opinion. And again, there's so many unintended consequences. It's not like you flip a switch and all of a sudden now all the land's owned by the government. But I'm really curious where his solution goes. Like, is it that we outlaw landlording, or is it that the government owns everything and now just the government becomes a landlord? Because if something's bad for individuals, why does giving a monopoly to the government inherently make it better? Right? All right, let's keep going.
We as a society just stopped treating homes as something it was permissible to profit from the ownership or sale of. Suddenly, the parasitic...
So I want to throw this back then. Is it wrong to profit off of food or water or basic utilities like heat, hydro? What about internet? I would argue all those are basic utilities in the 21st century as well, in addition to shelter. So if it's wrong to profit off of being a landlord, inherently based upon his logic here, I think the natural conclusion is it's wrong to profit off of food or water. And again, the problem is we may want to be like, oh, people shouldn't profit off of just water. But what if you oxygenate it? What if you add some flavoring? At what point in time are you now allowed to profit off of water? Is there a certain sugar content where if I sugar my water just enough, I can now profit and sell it as pop, but if it's pure water, I can't? The same argument is in effect with landlords or owning property or real estate. You know, should literally, like, anyways, I should let him keep explaining.
Class of venture capitalists who buy up thousands of vacant homes and let them languish unused so they can use them as collateral in an enormous speculation shell game would be eliminated. You wouldn't have foreign multinational corporations purchasing thousands of homes in your town and making them unlivable for working people. In cases like this, I firmly believe that these homes should be seized and zero compensation should be given to the previous owners.
Oh, just seizing land, giving no compensation to the previous owners. This sounds like a really good solution that definitely wouldn't cause any civil disturbances whatsoever. I apologize to those of you allergic to sarcasm because you are having an allergic reaction now.
Making the price of living in our community skyrocket. You deserve to lose that investment. You deserve to go broke. You scumbags. But it's one thing to complain about this.
So if I find out that my local farmer is profiting by selling me vegetables, do I have the right to just go and seize those vegetables? Because they're also a physiological need, right? Like it's at the bottom of the hierarchy of Maslow's triangle. Just asking. Thought slime.
The big mega corporations that are most of the landlords, it's quite another to complain about Joe, Jane, or Jean Schmo. Regular folk who rent out a little bit on the side to make ends meet. And while people like that may be less contemptible on the surface, they're no less exploitative.
Oh hey, I'm back, World the Hungarian Experiment, and I want to say, one thing that, you know, if you saw my little part earlier in the video where I was talking about how I think Matt is a badass and how he's a really good, great human being as well as a great landlord and a great real estate investor, Well, he's also a tenant as well. So right now, we're living in a new build home here in Byron of London, Ontario, and we're actually renting. Yes, we rent. He's renting this place, and I luckily am living here with him, along with three other guys, three other of his employees, wholesalers here, basically salesmen of real estate who are helping real estate investors get connected to people who are trying to sell their homes, who are in unlikely situations where they can't just put it on the market. They, might have had a death in the family, or they might have gone through divorce and they need to get rid of their property fast. And they don't have the time to do certain renovations for themselves and bring it up to a high level. So I live in this house here in Byron of London, Ontario with Matt McKeever and two other guys. And we're going all in on our passions in life. And we're renting this place. So if anyone has the least amount of bias here, it's Matt. He's a landlord and he's a tenant. But that's it for my little interjection here. Let's go back to your ridiculous video thought, Slime, and Matt reacting to some of the crazy things you say.
It's quite another to complain about Joe, Jane, or Gene Schmo. Regular folk who rent out a little bit on the side to make ends meet. And while people like that may be less contemptible on the surface, they're no less exploitative. They are, as a class of people, holding you hostage. You need a place.
How are they holding you hostage? You have the free mobility across this country. You can move to any city, any province, any municipality. You could literally just go up to where there's essentially unincorporated land, and you could probably just camp out there. So to make this argument that landlords are holding people hostage seems beyond frustrating to me, to be honest.
To live, and sure, you don't have to pay any of them individually, but you got to pay one of them. That makes the interests of the small landlord align with those of the big.
This is frustrating.
And against you. Any legislation that protects tenants is deleterious to the bottom line of landlords, big and small alike. And they'll fight tooth and nail against any legislation or regulation that eats into their bottom lines, even if it means keeping...
Okay, Thoughts Lime, because you're talking about regulation, I want to flip this entire view of regulation. You also understand that there's a lot of regulation that reduces the rental stock on the market, right? When the city starts banning basement apartments that are less than 6'5", that reduces a huge swath of the inventory available for people to live in. When governments start implementing certain requirements about the size of windows or fire escapes or anything like that, again, I'm not saying that these aren't important factors, and we may even want them as a society, but understand every time the government steps in and regulates things, it makes it more difficult for a landlord. A landlord, like any business owner, they're either going to pass along the cost to their end user, to the end customer, or they're going to go out of business. Those are like the two options. There's not like a middle ground where all of a sudden the landlord works for free and now you get to profit off of their fruits of their labor. Every individual should have the rights to their own labor. One of the problems here, Thought Slime, that you're having is you're not viewing it as there being any risk taken on by the landlord. There is inherent risk. They can invest into a property, and then a socialist like you might come into power and be able to seize that property from them. There's an inherent risk there. Because there's a risk, they need to price that into their business model. Same thing goes for any other sort of government regulation that makes it more difficult to become a landlord. So again, just naturally wanting to jump to government regulation doesn't solve, like, honestly guys, let's just have an adult talk here. How much government regulation have you truly seen that solved your problems? Just straight up. I'd love to hear in the comment section, because I see so much government regulation and red tape that slows down small entrepreneurs, that slows down individuals, that slows people down from achieving their goals. And I think that when we get into that nanny state, when we get into the thought that the government should be our babysitter, it really takes away personal control and the sense of locus of control for ourselves as well. So if all of a sudden you don't feel like it's within your power to change your position, now you just become a victim to life, and life just happens to you. I much prefer the system where we're in control and we feel a sense of obligation to help ourselves move along the economic spectrum.
The more profit they can extract from you, the better. And the more red tape and precautions they have to take, the less profit they can suck out of you. That is the nature.
So again, like, Thought Slime, I get it, and it sounds really bad when you frame things like this, but this is literally any for-profit business. Any for-profit business.
Of this relationship. It does not matter how kind or empathetic a person is. Once they step into that role, they are aligning their interests with capital against their tenants. If you think your landlord could resist this pressure, if you think they're too kind or too good of a person, ask yourself how kind they would be if you stopped paying them. Your relationship with them is a negotiation in which they will do everything they're legally able to do and anything they're not really legally able to do but they're confident they can get away with to get as much money as they can out of you. And in theory, you do everything you're able to do to fight back against them and make sure that you can keep as much.
This is really a dark view of the world. Like, I'm curious, Thought Slime, do you live in this scarcity world where everyone's out to get everyone else? To me, like, we talk about on my YouTube channel all the time, win-win relationships. I personally believe that we have win-win relationships with a lot of our tenants. Now, does that mean that we're perfect landlords? No. Does that mean that all my tenants are perfect? No. We're both humans. Humans are inherently imperfect. And so, again, just this view that anyone that's seeking profit is inherently a parasite, that inherently is taking advantage of another. Like, if you extrapolate this onto any other business, I feel like it seems silly. But you seem so beholden to this idea that rent seeking, that owning property should be illegal, that it's fascinating to me. I really hope we do get to hear some proposed solutions.
Much of your money as possible. But in reality, you need to live somewhere. They have leverage over you. It is not an equal power dynamic. It is a lot easier to go a month without one rent check than it is to go a week without a home. Landlords absolutely understand how to act as one body to protect their interests. They know how to form advocacy groups to protect their interests, all the while working to make sure you...
Every business inherently is going to form associations, right? And build advocacy groups, and they're naturally going to want to try and influence policy. Tenants do it, landlords do it, every business does it. It's inherently part of our democratic system here in Western democracies. Again, to single out landlords as somehow being different or above all those other businesses is not the case. We're not hiring million-dollar lobbyists that are going to Queen's Park. The people you're looking for there is like the alcohol, tobacco, the weed industry, pharmaceuticals. Those are the industries with really powerful lobbyist groups. If you think that landlords are a step above those industries as far as their ability to lobby and create policy or enact policy change, you're completely mistaken here, Thought Slime. In fact, if anything, every politician understands that by appeasing the masses, appeasing the tenants, one of the fastest way to buy votes. That's why we'll see so many people support minimum wage and rent control, even when they're economic policies that almost any economist worth their salt would dispute, because there's so many unintended consequences.
You can't do the same. They know how to lobby policymakers, and they know that in any bargain with you, they have all the chips and the full weight of the state at their back. And they can and will use that to put the squeeze on you.
I'm curious, Thought Slime, I'm assuming that you're in Ontario, Canada, because Kayla sent me this video. If you believe that the laws are aligned for landlords, you literally are batshit crazy out of your mind. Go read the Residential Tenancy Act. Go sit in when they open up the Landlord Tenant Board again.
Or to toss you from your home onto the street if you fight back even a little bit.
We literally can't toss people out onto the street. We have to hire the sheriff. And we can't even hire the sheriff during quarantine or COVID-19, bro.
Think about some of the nutso provisions we just accept as par for the course. You have to give your current landlord 2 months' notice before moving out, but no landlord renting to you is under any obligation to hold the property for 2 months so that you can get that settled. When was the last time a landlord did a credit check on you? When was the last time you did a credit check on a landlord? When was the last time you had the time or ability to investigate a landlord's financial reliability? To ask for references from them.
What, like, do you do this when you're an employee of a company? I'm just curious, Thought Slime. Like, I understand why you're making these arguments because you want to prove your point, but like the idea that landlords do reference checks doesn't seem crazy to me. As a tenant, I think it would be smart to talk to other tenants in that building. Why wouldn't you want to do your own due diligence when you're going to move apartments? Do you not Google the property and look to see if it's got, you know, any flags for bed bugs or active infestations or any, you know, problems against the property? Like, I literally do that before I look at buying a property. I'd imagine a tenant that's doing their own due diligence would do that. So, like, these are silly arguments.
If you signed a contract with someone because they held a gun to your head, that contract would be null and void. What is a lease if not a contract that you sign under threat of being tossed out onto the street?
No, a lease is a voluntary contract you enter into with a landlord. There's no gun held to your head. This is beyond ridiculous. Okay, this is the stupidity I was expecting.
That is extortion. I have some experience with contracts like that. I signed a contract once. I thought they were offering me salvation, but they condemned me. God damn them. God damn them. They condemned me to an Hello and welcome to the Eyeball Zone. Here in the Eyeball Zone, we absorb the life essence of small leftist projects to fuel our unspeakable thirsts. There is no human being who's ever lived whose ideas have been so thoroughly weaponized against the things they actually stood for as Martin Luther King Jr. If you're sick of people using Dr. King's memory as a cudgel to demand the obedience of the people he sought to liberate, then check out Afro-Syndicalist's video on MLK's complicated legacy and the way that his memory has been rewritten to suit white bourgeois interests. This is the first part in a multi-part series, and I'm looking forward to seeing the rest if he's still planning on doing more, which I hope he is. I don't know, he hasn't updated it since January. And as of the time of this recording, it's only got 124 views. That's kind of fucked up. Kind of feels like it should have more views than that. Like thousands more. Kind of feels like Afro-Syndicalist is making a lot of videos about the rich and storied history of black leftism, and that's maybe something we should all be paying more attention to a little bit. Maybe subscribe to him for that, you know? Just direct your eyeballs thusly. Do you have a small project you'd like to see featured here in the Eyeball Zone?
This is kind of cool. Like, I'm sure most of the projects he features here, I wouldn't personally like, but at the same time, this is cool. And this makes me want to almost create a right-leaning segment for my own channel like this, so.
Pandemic, we have seen quick action on deferring mortgages for homeowners by large banks. In Toronto, major banks have granted up to 8 months deferral on mortgage payments. No such equivalent relief has been offered to renters, who must make do with a temporary freeze on evictions.
Now, I understand the argument you're making here and that I suspect you're going to make. What we need to understand, though, is that most wage earners, they spend about 30-40% of their take-home pay on shelter. That's what Stats Canada shows us. So we can draw a conclusion that when the government gives you $2,000 a month in stimulus, the concept is 30-40% of that is going to go towards your shelter. So I would argue that the government, by offering $2,000 a month to every Canadian, essentially with a pulse that isn't working, that the government is subsidizing your cost of renting by $600 to $800 a month at least. That's that 30-40% amount.
Homeowners get a payment deferral. Renters get a homelessness deferral. There have been international calls for a rent strike on April 1st, which I absolutely believe people should take part in through organization with one another, tenants unions, and tenant advocacy groups. Simply keeping your rent on April 1st is not a...
So I'm curious, like on the rent strike argument here, are you advocating just whenever you enter into a legally binding contract and you decide later that you don't like the terms, you should just walk away from it? Just curious.
Enough. You need to build a network of people with which to defend yourself and one another. In the description to this video, I've included a guide from Parkdale Organize, a local tenant advocacy group in Toronto that has fought some pretty hardcore battles against big rental companies and has organized small, successful rent strikes in the past. They know what they're talking about, and they're a perfect model for how we should all be organizing in the days to come, because you bet your ass that your landlords are. Don't take my word for it, listen to the way that media outlets talk about the possibility of a rent strike. The very first Google result I got for the words rent strike was this article from some real estate publication I've never heard of called Toronto Stories, but with an EY, because it's a real estate magazine, is the joke. The whole article is about how scary a time this is for landlords, because their tenants might take advantage of them, quote, The Landlord and Tenant Board is currently closed until further notice and is not hearing any cases related to eviction while the COVID-19 outbreak continues. Even in a relatively smooth scenario, it can already take months or even a year for an Ontario landlord.
Yep, these are facts. I'm not sure why you're reading it in such an obnoxious way.
Oh, those poor babies. It can take months to kick someone out onto the street, and it's even harder to kick them out during the biggest pandemic in modern history.
So I'm curious your thoughts, Lime. Do you think, like, if I don't want to pay for food or booze, can I just go into the LCBO or the grocery store and grab shit? And then if, you know, the government or the store owner tries to stop me, that they're inherently evil and, you know, they're trying to starve me to death, they're trying to keep me from getting my liquor? Like, what? Why is it that we're so precious around shelter, but everything else is free game? That shows an emotional reaction, in my opinion, because that's a blind spot.
History for some reason. All the while, those tenants could be doing damage to their investment portfolio. Where's the justice? The article continues. In short, while the governments in this country have addressed a lot of new issues arising from the current pandemic, they have failed to so far properly inform and/or reassure landlords and businesses that their own mortgages and loss of income will be protected to some degree. And while there are a great deal of people who now find themselves unable to pay rent in the coming months, and this number will only grow moving forward, there are surely a subset of renters who will also take advantage of not having to pay rent without any consequences. The gall on these people, not paying rent just because the economy is imploding and potentially 30% of people might lose their jobs. It could take months to make them homeless. Where are the consequences when they don't give me the money? I should have the money. They don't get the money. An average approximation for the cost of maintenance fees at a downtown Toronto condo is 80 cents per square foot. So a 600 square foot condo is looking at about $400 a month in fees. Multiply that by the number of units that may not be able to afford to pay the monthly fees, and you can quickly see a crisis forming in some buildings, even if a plan for rent has been formed. But what about the maintenance fees? I shouldn't have to pay those maintenance fees just because I own the property and profit from the equity it generates. That's why I should be allowed to charge them for the maintenance fees, plus a little something on the side for daddy. The average maintenance fees are $400 a month, and the average cost of rent is a measly $2,500 a month. I'm barely scraping by here. What do you expect me to do? Sell one of my properties? Eat the cost from the decades of stolen wealth I've hoarded? Fat chance. I need that because of the revenue that I get from it. It's unreasonable to suggest I would give up something. Surely it makes more sense that the people...
I'm curious thoughts, Lime. Like, all the employees I have, all the contractors I use, all the people I pay, when my tenants don't pay me under your theory of a rent strike, should I just not pay them as well? You know, should I just go hat in hand and say, hey, look, you know what, my tenants didn't pay me, I'm not going to pay you? No, I'm going to meet my obligations. If I gave my word that I was going to do something, I'm going to do it to the best of my abilities. Again, I'm really curious what your solution here is, because we're almost through the video. We're 2/3 of the way through and we haven't heard a solution yet.
People losing their jobs should continue handing me gobs of money from nowhere because I own something they need so that I can have the money. I want the money. The second Google result was this article.
You understand every business is inherently, if it's like, every business is a for-profit enterprise. They're in the business of seeking margins, seeking income. And why should someone want to be a landlord? Why should someone want to take on the risk and the burden of being one if they don't have the right to profit? This is asinine. Like, you wouldn't go to your job if they didn't pay you. So why should, like, a landlord be a landlord if you're not going to pay your rent? It's really simple. Now, at the same time, the little quote you clipped there where it was referencing, you know, some tenants, there will surely be a subset of some tenants that will take advantage of this situation. There will be. And there'll be a subset of landlords that take advantage of this situation somehow as well. The thing is, tenants and landlords are made up of human beings. Human beings are inherently an imperfect creature. Just accept it. So again, while I don't believe all landlords are good or bad, I also don't believe all tenants are good or bad. They're just human beings. And in general, when we don't approach each other as adversaries, I feel like things go better. I feel like when we actually try and seek win-wins, like when the landlords I know reach out to their tenants and try and negotiate terms to figure out how to smooth this process out. That to me is a lot better than just a blanket rent strike. I don't understand where you think this leads.
CTV, which both sides of the issue pretty hard. It opens with a brief explanation about the goals of a rent strike and talks to some tenant advocacy groups. And then we get some quotes from Ontario Landlords Watch, a landlord advocacy group with a suspicious amount of sponsors. Hey, that's weird. That's a lot of sponsors, because they also quote the Federation of Metro Tenants Association in this article. But when you go to their website, they don't even talk about their sponsors.
Well, let's stop right here. You do realize that a lot of tenant advocacy groups are government funded, right? Or subsidized. You understand there's a lot more money going into subsidizing tenant right groups and protecting tenant rights versus landlord rights, right? So when Ontario Landlords Watch has sponsors, that's how they're able to pay for their organization to exist. I haven't had enough time because I'm literally watching this on the fly, but I would be shocked to find out that FMTA doesn't have any government source of funding. So like,
weird, isn't it? It's almost like there's a lot of money on one side and the other side is trying to protect people with less money. Anywho, the Ontario Landlords Watch CEO Kayla Andrade had this to say. There are a growing number of tenants who are planning a rent strike. This could be catastrophic for landlords who need that money to be able to make their payments, she said. Look, if you stop making payments just because you can't make payments, I won't be able to make payments. That's the real catastrophe. The third Google result is from the Globe and Mail. It contains some choice nugs. And it opens like this. Residential landlords are facing mounting pressure to ease or defer rental charges as the COVID-19 pandemic results in widespread layoffs and loss of income, leading some tenants to consider withholding payments as part of a rent strike, due to start next month. You know who's really feeling the pressure here? It's the landlords who are being bullied by all the people who can't afford to pay rent because they got laid off. Just listen to the way they framed it. It opens with the phrase, residential landlords are facing mounting pressure. It seems like the people facing the pressure are the people losing their jobs, to me.
Thoughts, Lime, like I understand where you're going with this, but at the same time, do you understand the government is giving $2,000 a month benefit to Canadians, right? That this argument you're making about landlords isn't happening in isolation. And all the topics and articles you're cribbing from, that you're choosing from, those are coming based upon talking about the topic of landlords and rent strikes. Inherently, it's going to focus on that. Why would you expect it to take the narrative of the tenant's perspective? Like, it just doesn't make sense based upon the sort of articles you're looking at. There's a ton of articles out there talking about the struggles of tenants. There's a ton of articles out there talking about the struggles of employees and people losing their jobs. And I don't think that any landlord is operating as if they're in a vacuum. We understand that some tenants are going to struggle to pay rent, and we want to work with those tenants. I think what's really off-putting to me is how adversarial you became throughout this video towards landlords.
A spokesperson for Timber Creek Communities said the company would work with tenants who, quote, demonstrate a financial hardship with their rent payment, end quote. It will also temporarily suspend rent increases starting in April. Our heroes. Hey, we know you're going through a tough time right now, and that's why we've talked about it, and we're going to temporarily stop making this time substantially harder for you next month. You're welcome. Here comes another quote from our old friend Kayla Andrade. Kayla Andrade and her husband own several units in Cambridge, Ontario. One of her tenants works in retail and is temporarily out of work. This article also doesn't mention that she's the head of a landlord advocacy group, which I feel is kind of relevant information, kind of demonstrates that this source has a bias in one particular direction. Miss Andrade has told her tenant to pay whatever you can based on what comes in, but that she can only do that with so many of her tenants. Again, look at the framing. Forget the tenant's position. That's unfortunate, I guess. How is she supposed to survive off the tenant only giving her as much as she's able to? That's not fair. They should have to give more than they're able to.
I don't think anyone was making that argument there, Slime.
Paid the full rent from all her tenants, and if they refuse to pay, she will file an eviction order. Rent is the rent for many reasons. No one is lowering my mortgage payments, and no one is lowering my water bill, she said. Actually, the rent is the rent for one reason, Kayla. because you're charging people to live in their home. Because
Actually, Slime, the rent is a rent for one reason, because two adults entered into a mutually agreed upon contract under no adverse circumstances. There was no compulsion here. There was no one holding a gun to your head.
you bought a home so that you could charge people money. That's the reason. It's the only reason. But if you want to stop paying those mortgage payments and water bills, I actually have a suggestion, and try this. It's a real simple trick you can use. Sell the home. Do you see the problem that you have? The problem of having to pay the bills in this home that you don't live in only exists because you bought a home to charge people to live in? Like if you didn't own it, if you didn't own a second home.
Slime, you realize that the only problem here in your entire argument is that if people don't fulfill a contract that they agreed to, right? That they entered voluntarily into a contract. And in general, in societies, we like to assume that adults that voluntarily enter into contracts will simply meet their obligations from those contracts. And that when they can't, that they'll be adults and reach out to the other adults that signed the contract and negotiate some sort of alternative accommodations, rather than simply being a child and lashing out and proposing rent strikes and just flights of fancy that have no real life application or ability to be implemented in a serious manner.
Specifically to make money from people, someone else would pay for it, someone who lived there. You see that? Most tenants don't have the option of selling off their properties when times get tough. And if they do, that means they're landlords themselves. So you see how that you kind of created this problem for yourself, and it's not really equivalent to the problem that your tenants are facing. You kind of created your own problem here by wanting free money because you own a place.
It's not free money. The same way that the person that owns the McDonald's franchise you eat at, or the person that owns the local coffee shop, or the person that owns the photocopy joint, all those people are business owners. A landlord is a business owner. That's it.
I could go on. Look at any news story about a potential rent strike that isn't from an explicitly leftist source, and you'll see the same framing. Here's what's happening, here's why, and here's why it would cause problems for the poor, innocent little landlord. So you shouldn't take part. The reason for this is clear. It's because the class of people that own the newspapers and media companies also own property that they don't want to lose the profits from. The rich know how to come together and fight as one to protect their interests, and we have to do the same. There's nothing you as an individual can do to stand up to the property-owning class. This is not a David versus Goliath problem. It's a David versus several thousand Goliaths and also the police work for Goliath problem. The odds are insurmountably stacked.
The police don't work for Goliath here in your analogy there, Slime. In fact, if I'm a landlord and I'm having problems with a tenant in Ontario, Canada, and I call the government, if I call the police to try and solve the problem, they're going to tell me, nope, that's under the Residential Tenancy Act. I can't stop that tenant from trashing your apartment. I can't stop that tenant from being an asshole. I can't force that tenant to pay you. I can't force that tenant out. You're going to have to go through the LTB, which is currently closed. You're going to have to wait a really long time. Even when things were operating as normal, it would take months at a time, then several months for the paperwork to get processed. Then you'd have to wait for the sheriff. Then you kick them out. You make it sound like I can just snap my fingers and kick a tenant out at any moment. This is completely wrong. And anyone that spent any time studying or getting a firm understanding of how the LTB and RTA work here in Ontario, Canada, would easily be able to say that. And any tenant advocacy group that's arguing that tenants get kicked out too easy is they've inherently lost the moral high ground, in my opinion, because they're lying. They're straight up lying. It takes months and months, and it will likely take over a year now to evict a tenant if and when the LTB opens up again. It's just that simple.
Act against you as an individual if you act alone. The only hope we have of fighting back is by organizing. Advocacy groups, tenants unions, rent strikes, mutual aid. This is a topic we're going to be returning to as COVID-19 sweeps the globe, as the working class bears the brunt of the economic devastation left in its wake. I've included some places to get started in the description, including an FAQ for how and why to rent strike from Montreal Counter Information. Go there and read those things. Would be a good thing you could do today. You got time. What do you got? Well, you got somewhere to be? You can't go outside. You can't go nowhere. can't go to the movies.
All right, looks like he's doing his wrap up here, guys. So I'm going to wrap up this video. I don't think that it was some of my most nuanced arguments, but at the same time, like, I just find it intellectually bankrupt to make some of the arguments he's making and then not propose any real solutions. There literally wasn't a realistic solution proposed in this entire video. Okay, you rent strike April 1st. What happens? You rent strike May 1st. You rent strike June 1st. The fuck happens next? Like, is just your solution for the rest of existence? Tenants own any property they're in? What happens if someone wants to move somewhere else? Are we allowed to sell our property? Like, to criticize the system is very easy. To propose a practical solution is near impossible. And I don't really find a lot of value in just criticizing a system without any sort of even attempts at proposing real solutions that are going to help. Like, honestly, I think that you're doing your audience a disfavor by promoting rent strikes, because I don't think it's going to be in their best interest. Like, I don't think that you're going to get some sort of 99% versus 1% where you're really going to truly upheave our entire economic system. I don't think that you're going to flip capitalism on its head with a rent strike. And I think that you're actually going to put some of your audience in a more vulnerable state if they choose to rent strike, because that is going to give the landlord a valid reason to try and process an eviction. And I think that you're creating a very adversarial stance between landlords and tenants. And I don't think anyone benefits from that. I think the only people that benefit are the people that get the views. So when people purposefully try and pull at the social fabric that is the cohesion that keeps us together as a society, I find that highly concerning. And that's what I think that a lot of these rent strikers are doing. That's what I think that a lot of people advocating for rent strikes are doing. Now, I'm not saying that they purposely all have malintentions. In fact, I think a lot of them are just good people that haven't studied enough on the subject matter and haven't thought about the unintended consequences of what their emotional reactions to a problem are. Problems are profits, guys. It's really important that we take the onus on ourselves, that we step up and we take control of the situation. If you want the government to save you, you're never getting saved. If you're willing to become the hero in your own story, you will get saved. And it's that simple in my opinion. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Smash the like button, hit the subscribe button, all that good stuff. I'd love to get your perspective. I know this was a really long video. Let me know in the comment section your feedback.